Think about everyone in your life right now. Your family, your co-workers, the people you call friends. Now ask yourself, how many of them do you actually trust? Not tolerate, not like, not find convenient to have around. Trust, if your honest answer is 1 or 0. This video is about you. And here's what nobody tells you about that number. It's not just a wound, it's not a failure. It might be the most quietly accurate thing about you. Because here's something strange. People who trust almost nobody aren't usually the broken ones in the room. They're often the most awake ones. And that comes with a particular kind of loneliness that almost no one around them understands. In 1791, a philosopher named Jeremy Bentham designed a prison, not as a thought experiment, as a real architectural proposal. He called it the Panopticon, a circular building, cells on the outside ring, a guard tower at the center. The design was simple and brutal. The guard could see every prisoner at any moment. But no prisoner could ever see the guard. What happened wasn't what you'd expect. The prisoners didn't rebel when no guard was watching. They behaved as if they were always being watched, because they could never know when the eyes were on them. The philosopher Michel Foucault later used this image to describe how entire societies control themselves from the inside, how surveillance doesn't need to be constant to be total. But here's what nobody talks about. What happens when someone turns this structure inward? Not as a prison, as a defense system. What happens when you become the one in the tower? The lone wolf doesn't avoid being known because they're shy. They avoid being known because to be fully known is to hand someone the map of your vulnerabilities. So they observe. They position themselves at the margins of rooms. They keep information asymmetric. They know more about others than others know about them. To be invisible is not weakness. To be invisible is to be ungovernable, and ungovernable is the only thing that feels safe. But, and this is the first thing I want you to hold on to, Bentham's prisoners didn't become free by being in the Panopticon. They became the instrument of their own surveillance. They controlled themselves so completely that the prison ran itself. In the 1990s, a researcher named Elaine Aron identified a trait present in roughly 15 to 20% of the population. She called it sensory processing sensitivity. The brain processes incoming information, social cues, emotional shifts, environmental signals, at a significantly deeper level than average. This is not anxiety, though anxiety can accompany it. It is not shyness, though withdrawal can look like it. It is neurologically a different processing depth. You don't just see what's happening, you see what's underneath. In ordinary low-stakes situations, this creates what Aron called overstimulation. Crowded places feel loud when it's not. People feel heavy even when they're talking. And you need long stretches to recover, but in social environments with genuine threat, manipulation, pretense, concealed aggression, this trait doesn't create weakness. It creates detection. What researchers sometimes document in literature on this trait is that individuals with high sensory sensitivity tend to report noticing interpersonal incongruence. When someone's tone doesn't match their words, when a smile doesn't reach the eyes, when a question is shaped like curiosity, but functions like a probe, before others register anything unusual, before the person being duplicitous even realizes they've revealed something. The world calls this paranoia. You call it Tuesday. And this is where it gets philosophically interesting, because there's another layer to how the lone wolf operates socially. In certain behavioral psychology circles, there's a concept called the gray man, someone who deliberately presents themselves as unremarkable, not to hide, but to disappear inside plain sight. Think about it. If you appear ordinary, people don't bother studying you. They don't try to use you. They don't probe you for leverage. They move on to easier, more visible targets. What looks like social disengagement from the outside is actually a form of strategic mediocrity. You seem boring on purpose. You reveal nothing that could become ammunition. You keep what you're actually building, your real thoughts, your real work, your real life, completely out of sight. The gray man doesn't hide from weakness. The gray man hides from those who would misuse strength. That distinction matters enormously. Now, Sartre wrote something once, and I'm paraphrasing his actual text from No Exit. The idea was essentially that other people, when positioned as your judges, become your captors. For Sartre, hell is other people wasn't a grumpy sentiment. It was an existential diagnosis. Every social group demands that you compress yourself into a shape the group can recognize and tolerate. To fit in is to be slightly false. The lone wolf makes a specific choice here. They choose the discomfort of isolation over the comfort of inauthenticity. Starvation over being fed lies. That's not pathology. That's philosophy with consequences. I want to talk about the burn the ships mentality, because most people who analyze the lone wolf get this completely wrong. They frame it as emotional damage, inability to tolerate conflict, fear of confrontation dressed up as strength. That's not what it is. The moment trust is fractured, they're gone. Not because they can't handle it, because they've already run the calculation. They know what a conversation in that moment costs. The energy spent explaining themselves to someone who already showed them who they were. An explanation is a gift, and you don't give gifts to people who just robbed you. This is not avoidance. This is efficiency at a level most people can't access, because they're still hoping the other person will suddenly become different. The lone wolf stopped hoping for that years ago, and that's not a wound, that's clarity. Most people look at the way you walk away from relationships and call it burning bridges. They think you're impulsive. They're looking at the smoke. You're looking at the garden. In botany, aggressive pruning isn't an act of violence against the tree. It's an act of salvation. If a tree tries to provide nutrients to every single scraggly, diseased or parasitic branch, the core of the tree weakens. It produces small bitter fruit. To grow tall and strong, those branches must be cut so that the tree's limited resources can be redirected to the center. You have a finite amount of relational capital. Every shallow acquaintance, every friend who secretly drains your energy, and every co-worker who only talks to you to fish for gossip is a branch that is leaking your nutrients. When you burn the ships, you aren't just reacting to a betrayal. You are performing a strategic audit. You are deciding that your time and your peace are too valuable to be spent on people who provide a 0% return on investment. Walking away isn't a loss, it's a reclamation. By pruning the dead wood from your life, you are ensuring that your energy is finally being spent where it belongs, on your own growth, your own projects, and the very few people who actually have the depth to sustain you. You aren't lonely because you left. You are concentrated because you stayed true to the core. Now, there is one thing worth looking at honestly. Not as a criticism, as a calibration question. I'm not telling you this to attack you, but to let you check. There is a philosophical concept called solipsism. In its extreme form, the position that only your own mind can be verified to exist. Most people dismiss it as an abstract curiosity, but there is a functional version of it. When a system receives no external input for long enough, it starts running on its own conclusions as if they were facts. The lone wolf's pattern detector is sharp, genuinely sharp. It was built from real data, real experience, real betrayal. But a detector that never receives new data doesn't stay calibrated, it drifts, not just toward seeing threats that aren't there, but toward a quieter problem, toward mistaking the map for the territory. Jung's actual framework on what he called the shadow was about integrating the parts of yourself that get exiled when the psyche decides they're too dangerous to carry openly. For the lone wolf, the shadow isn't just darkness, it's the part that still knows what genuine presence feels like. Not connection with just anyone. The very specific, very rare thing that happens when someone proves over time through behavior, not words, that they can be trusted with the unperformed version of you. That knowledge doesn't disappear because you've stopped looking for it. It just waits. The question isn't whether you've built walls. The walls are correct. The question is whether the gate still works, or whether it sealed itself shut so long ago that you've forgotten it was ever there. The world will tell you that the problem is your standards, that you expect too much, that if you'd just lower the bar a little, you'd have more friends, more warmth, more of whatever you're missing. This is a lie dressed up as advice. Here's what lowering the bar actually produces. You end up surrounded by people you don't trust, performing a version of yourself you don't recognize, wondering why you still feel alone. The problem was never the standards. The problem is that we live in a culture that has normalized extraordinary shallowness and called it connection. Where having 100 acquaintances you'd never call in a crisis is called being social. Where being liked by people who don't know you is called success. Against that backdrop, the lone wolf isn't broken. The lone wolf is allergic to something that actually is poison. Marcus Aurelius, who governed one of the largest empires in human history, understood that dependence on the crowd's approval is a kind of enslavement. The Stoics called this autarkia, self-sufficiency, not as isolation, as freedom. The lone wolf who has made peace with their own company isn't lonely in the way most people assume. They are free in a way most people never experience. That is not nothing. That is not a consolation prize. That is a form of wealth that can't be taken from you. You, however, have a high mass presence. Because you don't participate in the social leakage of trivial chatter, your words carry 10 times the weight of an average person's. When you finally choose to speak, the room doesn't just hear you, it feels you. This is what's known in leadership psychology as referent power. It's the authority that comes from not needing anything from the people around you. When you aren't fishing for laughs, begging for approval, or trying to fit in, you become the gravitational center of the room. People are naturally drawn to and slightly intimidated by someone who is comfortable in their own stillness. This isn't about being cold, it's about being substantial. By refusing to dilute yourself through constant, shallow interaction, you have traded being liked for being formidable. You have realized that the most powerful person in any room is the one who is perfectly content to leave it. Radical self-sovereignty isn't the inability to connect. It's the refusal to connect on terms that require you to be smaller than you are. That's not armor. That's a standard, and the standard isn't the problem. The world's consistent failure to meet it, that's the problem. Here is something the lone wolf knows that almost nobody around them understands. The people who matter, the very few, the genuinely rare, don't need to be explained the standard. They already live by one close enough to recognize it. They see the walls and don't perform offense. They don't push. They don't try to prove themselves with words. They just show up, consistently, over time. And the lone wolf notices. They always notice. This is the thing that never gets said. The lone wolf is not someone who cannot be reached. They are someone with a very high threshold for what earns reach. That's not a disability. That's a filter, and filters that high produce very little noise. Let me bring this all the way back to where we started. You trust almost nobody. You always thought the question was, what's wrong with you? But that was never the right question. The right question is, what did trust cost you and when did you decide the price was too high? Here's what every other video gets wrong at this point. They pivot to the fix. Here's how to open up. Here's how to let people in. Here's the growth edge. As if the lone wolf is a problem that needs solving. As if the issue is with them and not with what they were repeatedly shown. Let's be precise about something. You didn't arrive at distrust through imagination. You arrived there through evidence, collected carefully. Over time, someone showed you their real face at a moment they thought you weren't watching. Someone used what you shared in private as currency, in a conversation you weren't part of. You didn't become a lone wolf because you read too much Nietzsche. You became one because people kept confirming the thesis, again and again, until the sample size was too large to argue with. John Bowlby's attachment research, which forms the backbone of modern developmental psychology, shows that our earliest experiences of trust don't just inform how we relate to people. They form the actual internal template from which we interpret the world. The lone wolf in most cases didn't choose this. They adapted. And adaptation is intelligence. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But here is the thing about adaptations. They are built for the environment that created them, not necessarily for the environment you're in now. The question isn't whether your walls kept you safe. They did. The question is whether you're still in the same danger. Whether every room you walk into still carries the same threat. Whether every person still carries the same potential for the specific wound that built the wall in the first place. That is what this video was actually about. Not whether you should change who you are, but whether you know why you are this way. And whether, knowing that you still want to be, that's not a question I can answer for you. It might be the only question worth answering for yourself. I'll see you in the next one.